Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're doing well, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk about a guy who was, I suppose you'd call him a cult figure. He is someone who was, to say little more than a journeyman is not to do him justice in any way. It sounds quite insulting, but he finished his career. Started in 1994, finished it in 2011. So that's, what is that, a 17-year career. And he ended up with 38 wins, 20 KOs, 34 defeats, 5 by stoppage and 6 draws. And his name originally was Emmanuel Burton. I think that's his birth name. But he then, halfway through his career, he changed his name to Emmanual Augustus. And he was an extremely talented but very, very bizarre character who was given absolutely nothing throughout his career, thrown in at the deep end from the word go, never had anyone supporting him. One of his opponents, and we're going to go through quite a few of his opponents, and you'll see that he really fought, a who's who in boxing in the 90s and the noughties. But one of his opponents, the most famous one, was FLOYD MAYWEATHER Jr. And Mayweather said that he, meaning Augustus, I'll call him by his adopted name, he was probably one of the most talented fighters that Floyd had ever faced. And Floyd, he isn't exactly renowned for giving out, plaudits, really, is he? But he said this guy could really fight, despite his very, very patchy record, which doesn't in any way do his natural talent justice. Now, this guy, Augustus, he turned professional in 1994, and he won 5 of his first 6 fights. But here's the thing, of those 6 opponents, 5 were undefeated. So, and they didn't have a lot of fights. They were people who didn't really go on to tear up any trees, but nevertheless to be thrown in against, other guys who are undefeated, and to win 5 of them, it shows that, the guy had some ability, or at the very least, he had some self-belief. I should point out he's an American fighter, of course. If you've heard of this guy, you'll know him. He's from Chicago, Illinois. His nickname originally was the Outlaw, but a lot of people have adopted the nickname almost after his career of the Drunken Master. That's what they call him. And so he went on the road, he was fighting in Texas, in Louisiana, taking paychecks where he could get them. He ended up being one, win 2, lose 2, draw 1, that sort of opponent. He fought Jesus Chavez, who was a good fighter, went on to be a good fighter. I think he held a belt very briefly. And he fought him and lost a 7th round TKO. That was back in 1995. He lost a 10-round decision, fought a guy called Pete Talafiero, who was a contender in the 90s. Decent enough fighter, B-level fighter, pretty good. He also lost a 10-round unanimous decision the year later, 1996, to Ivan Robinson, who would go on twice to beat Arturo Gatti. Robinson was a good fighter. People forget how good those Gatti fights were. They were amazing fights. Well, Gatti was in so many great fights, wasn't he? But go and have a look if you haven't seen them. Wilfred Negron, he got a draw with him over 6. Negron, was it a draw over 6 or did he lose that one? I think he might have lost that one, actually. I can't remember. I know he fought Wilfred Negron at some point. He also went to Germany and fought Stephen Smith, not the Stephen Smith who would go on to be British, what was it? Featherweight champ, wasn't it? And fight for world titles, but another Stephen Smith from the 90s who would go on and fight Ricky Hatton. And Stephen Smith wasn't a bad little fighter, but Augustus fought him in Germany when Smith was undefeated in 15 and ended up beating him. So, he was, wherever he could find a gig, he'd go there. And when you consider that, he wasn't getting paid much money, the fact that he was continuing to ply his trade and not losing any sort of motivation is pretty amazing. He fought a guy called, a very good contender actually, called a Cuban guy called Diabilis Hurtado. He fought him, I think it was the same year he fought Smith, which was 97. That was a 10-round defeat. He almost always lost on points, almost always. Very rarely was he stopped, and the 5 stoppages on his career are towards the end, on his resume are towards the end of his career. He fought, to be honest with you, I first heard of him when he came over to Britain in 1998 and fought a guy called John Thaxton, who would go on to be British and European light welterweight champ. And Thaxton got stood on his head, to be honest with you. Thaxton had beaten Paul Scrap Iron Ryan in a round, knocked him flat when Ryan was British champ and previously undefeated. Thaxton had just gone in there and smashed him up. I mean, just got rid of him, knocked him spark out. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't even get close to Emmanuel Augustus, who won in 7 rounds. Well, it was a terrific win. Prior to that, he'd beaten... no, he hadn't beaten him. He drew with him, I think. I think it was an 8-rounder or 6-rounder. I want to say 8-rounder against Soren Sondergaard, who was a pretty good Danish fighter, good European level fighter. So he was having some success in Europe. Although he did lose in 12 rounds to Alan Vester. That was also in Denmark as well. He beat a guy called Terrell Finger, who was, I think they were twins or brothers, the Finger brothers, believe it or not, they were called. And Terrell at the time was undefeated in 22 fights. I think he had 1 draw, but he got stopped in the 12th and final round by Augustus. So Augustus, this was in sort of 98, 99. He was really coming into his prime now, Augustus, and really springing some upsets. He did lose a couple of 12-rounders to Teddy Reed, who was a decent, a very exciting fighter, Teddy Reed. Light welterweight in the late 90s, very, very exciting guy. Vulnerable, could get knocked out, but would go hell for leather and kill or be killed. He also lost over 12 to Antonio Diaz, who was a very good fighter. These are fringe world level fighters. John Molina, he lost a 10-round decision to him. Molina at the time had about 50 wins and 6 defeats or something like that. I mean, he's almost adopted that gatekeeper role at world level now, Augustus, although still capable of springing some real upsets. And then in 2000, he fought someone you may have heard of, FLOYD MAYWEATHER Jr. And he got stopped in 9 rounds. It was a 10-round. He got stopped on his feet. I remember watching that fight live because I was living in America at the time. And I watched that, I think it was on Friday Night Fights. And he was giving Floyd an argument. I'm telling you now, if you watch that fight, he wasn't winning the fight, but he was certainly landing punches on Floyd and giving him something to think about. And Floyd turned up the heat, stopped him in 9. I do remember, I think it might have been a corner stoppage or the towel came in or something, because I remember Emmanuel Augustus being very irate at that fight, being stopped. I think the towel might have come in, something like that. But from there, I mean, he put up such a great performance that his stock definitely rose. And again, he proved himself to be far, far better than his very, very patchy record. And then in 2001, and I saw this one live as well, I think this was Friday Night Fights as well, he fought, I think the Mayweather one might have been on Showtime, maybe? I can't remember, but I know for a fact that the Mickey Ward fight that he had, which was an absolute barn burner, that was in 2001. That was on Friday Night Fights because I remember Teddy Atlas going mental. And he lost a 10-round decision, but it was very, very close. I mean, it was unanimous. I remember some people saying, oh, no, I think Augustus won that fight, but I don't know about that. He then lost a 10-round decision to Leonard Doreen, who was another good fighter, another very, very good fighter. He got a draw over 10 with Leavander Johnson. And he just carried on, like losing. He was he started to lose more than he was winning, but he was still fighting people like David Diaz, who I think briefly was undefeated at the time and briefly held a belt. And then, you know, sadly, he'd spring the odd upset, like he beat Alex Trujillo, who at the time I think was undefeated, or only had one or two. I mean, either he was undefeated or he had one or two defeats on his record. He was highly ranked. But then he kind of started, like I say, started to lose more. Like he lost a split decision over Courtney Burton. I think he beat Burton in a rematch further down the line. Where he's up 10-rounder maybe, or an 8 or 10-rounder. And then he had, you know, kind of a sort of last hurrah. But you put him in with anyone who was less than world level, and he was going to beat them. Because if you look at his wins towards the end of his career, most of them are against, you know, journeyman or club fighter types. But then, sadly, it comes to us all. Age comes to us all. He carried on for too long. He lost to Ruslan Provodnikov. That was a stoppage defeat in 9. Charles Hatley beat him over 8. And I think he lost his last 5, maybe. And then he quit. Now, this guy, to me, he's the modern day. I mean, his career started 30 years ago, but when you're as old as I am, it's more or less modern day. He's one of the more recent, let's put it that way, examples of a guy who has so much talent, but he never fulfills it because he just doesn't have the guidance. He doesn't have a promoter behind him. He doesn't have the right manager. He's thrown in at the deep end. And yet he's got so much talent. Was he the most disciplined of fighters? Apparently not. He was kind of crazy out of the ring. I don't mean he was doing all sorts of really naughty stuff, but in the ring he would, showboat. He would pretend to be drunk, which is probably part of the reason where we got that Drunken Master nickname from. I'm assuming it wasn't anything to do with his out of the ring activities, or it might have been. But a very, very good fighter. 38 wins, 34 defeats, and 6 draws. To have 78 fights these days is something else. But when you look at the quality of the opposition, it was really only good guys that beat him. Guys who were good or very good, or in the case of Floyd Mayweather, great. But he was springing upsets. Well into this century, he was springing a couple of upsets here and there. And weirdly enough, going 2-0 against British fighters, he wasn't invited back, which is not really surprising. But go and have a look at him. I mean, he was a character, and there's loads of his stuff on YouTube if you want to have a look at it. I would thoroughly recommend, the ones I would recommend would be, if you want to watch a beatdown, watch him against John Thaxton. I like Thaxton. Thaxton was a good fighter, good European level fighter, but he couldn't get going against this guy. But probably the best fight I ever saw him in was the Mickey Ward fight, which was fantastic. And we know about Ward because of his 3 fights with Gatti. But the one with Emmanuel Burton / Augustus deserves your time. Trust me when I tell you that, all right? So go and have a look at him. Tell me what you think. If you don't know him, if you want to dig him out on YouTube, you could do worse if you're a boxing fan. And let me know what you think. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this. Something a little bit different today, wasn't it? But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, you could subscribe. That'd be great too. All right. Thank you very much. Catch you later. Bye for now.